Welcome in. It's week 17 here on the Footballguys DFS Show. We have an 8-game main slate coming up here this weekend. We have games all over the week for it's Christmas week or whatever holiday you celebrate this week. But we are here. We're going to break down these 8 games. We're going to look at the DraftKings main slate. We're going to look at cash games, GPP plays, run through, mention some FanDuel, and really just kind of look at what games we're going to look at through here. But first off, welcome into our DFS captain, Devin Knotts, and our good friend Phil Alexander as well here every single week. Devin, how are you doing this week?
You know what holiday I celebrate, Jeff? The end of the Browns season.
Yeah.
Draft season. I'm very happy that Joel Bitonio and Myles Garrett are basically like, you bring this back, don't count on me. So I don't know if that's about the coaching staff. I don't know if that's about Deshaun Watson. It's probably about both, but fire everybody and just blow the whole thing up. Also, best bet of the week, Lamar Jackson plus 170 or whatever he is to win the MVP. Jeff would like that one a lot.
Good for you. Phil, how are you doing? How's your week? And kind of maybe let's dive in. What are you looking for this week?
Phil, do you like Lamar Jackson at plus 170? Can we talk about that? I think there's value there. I think it should be even money.
I'm fine with it. Plus 170 sounds
we're
good.
We're a Lamar Jackson podcast now.
False.
So yeah, it was an interesting week. I actually had a good Christmas day, had a decent sweat, ended up a top 25 finish in not the big $25 Christmas GPP, but a single entry. Almost got there. Went wrong at tight end, even though Isaiah likely caught a touchdown. But this slate, man, first thoughts, I mean, quarterback is gross. Running back is kind of gross. Wide receiver is mostly gross. Tight end is definitely gross. So welcome to a fun 8-game slate.
Well, it's an 8-game slate that has the Giants, Cleveland, Jacksonville, Tennessee, New Orleans, Las Vegas. I think that's it for like teams that we just don't want to play. So it's really a 5-game slate.
Yeah, the schedule makers did us zero favors. Games we're targeting, I would say Broncos at Bengals. Bengals 3-point favorites, trying to keep very slim playoff hopes alive. That one's got a 49-point total. Panthers at Bucks.
That one's a Saturday game.
Which one?
Broncos-Bengals is a Saturday game.
Broncos-Bengals is Saturday. So that explains why there's no Broncos or Bengals in the rest of my picks, even though I like that game. So yeah, we're in final season of the
we are in holiday
final
week
of the
mode.
season form. All right, so backing up then, man, really ugly slate because now we've only got 2 games worth targeting. One of them is Panthers at Bucks, with the Bucks 8-point favorites, 48.5-point total. And then I would say that the premier game on the slate, probably both for DFS and from an NFL perspective, is Packers at Vikings. Vikings short home favorites there in what should be a good one. And then I think if you're playing on FanDuel, you at least have the Cardinals at Rams with a 48.5-point total in what I believe is the Sunday night game, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
But I seem to have the schedule all sorts of wrong. And then I think the only other thing is we got to watch Jeff's Bills. They have a 28-point implied team total against my hapless Jets. So if we're playing sides, not necessarily games that are going to shoot out, I think we got to like the Bills side.
Or we don't if we like Lamar Jackson to win the MVP.
Well, that's the narrative, apparently, that we're dealing with now. Colts going up against the Giants. That could be another one. We've seen the Giants, some teams get right. The Colts are still very much fighting for a playoff spot. Similar position, Dolphins going up against the Browns and potentially, I mean, it's supposed to be 61 degrees, I think. So maybe the Dolphins will actually come to play that game. So that might be a good spot for them. You got a warm spell that's coming through, especially the Midwest here, that give you some good game weather here for what is a week 17. I mean, Cowboys, Eagles, I feel like the bottom kind of fell out of that one with CeeDee Lamb out, with probably, it looks like potentially Jalen Hurts will be out. A.J. Brown might even be out. I'm not sure where we end up with those premier players in that game, but yeah, that's what we got right now. Let's see here. Before we go forward, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And we appreciate you all being here. We appreciate you taking this time in this holiday week to join here with us. And we appreciate that you've been here all year long. Thank you all out there, of course. Like and subscribe to YouTube. And let's dive into our cash game plays. Let's look at quarterbacks. Phil, you mentioned that this is a gross quarterback slate. What are you going with at quarterback at your cash game?
At this stage of the game, I know that it's going to be an Indianapolis Colt. It's either Anthony Richardson if he's active or Joe Flacco if he's not. And that really speaks to the state of quarterbacks on this slate. Earlier today, before I knew Richardson was even dealing with something serious, he was literally the only quarterback I could see playing in cash because he gives you that 13 to 15 point floor. And even though there are the quarterbacks on the slate who could get you there with reliability, they don't have that 25 plus point ceiling that Richardson does. He had a rushing TD wiped off the board on a bad call last week, or he would have gotten over 25. This week, the Colts are playing the Giants, as you mentioned. And, New York was so laughably bad on both sides of the ball that Michael Penix didn't have to do anything after we touted him as a cash game play on this show. But the odds of that playing out that way for a second straight week aren't good. And then if Richardson has to sit and you have to go with Flacco, the floor really isn't any different because he's going to throw so much. He won't hit a ceiling with the same regularity because he won't rush, but he does have a 30-point game on his resume as recently as week 5 of this season, and he's $1,000 less than Richardson. I do like the way that the lineup fills out better around Flacco for whatever that's worth, but I don't know. Who else are you going to show up to a cash game with this week?
And just to clarify, the Arizona LA Rams game is Saturday night, and Washington versus Atlanta is Sunday night. So good job, Phil.
Completely bungled that one.
I'm going Bryce Young, 5,600. Has a nice rushing upside facing Tampa Bay, who might have the worst pass defense in the league. Certainly of like the competitive teams. It's them or Jacksonville who have the worst pass defenses in the NFL. Maybe Baltimore could be thrown in there, but Baltimore's playing a little bit better. And I'm certainly not playing Mason Rudolph. I expressed my opinion of him last week, and I'm not going to do that again. So he doesn't like Myles Garrett. I'm going to put it that way. So yeah, I mean, Bryce Young certainly showing an upside. He had a long run last week that kind of saved his day, but he almost threw for 300 yards the first time that these two teams met. He should get Xavier Legette back, I think, which would be a nice little upgrade considering they really don't have much at wide receiver. But, he's run for 20 yards or more in 4 of his last 6 games, 3 touchdowns in those 6 games on the ground. And like I said, 298 yards passing and a touchdown the first time they met, including a rushing touchdown. So the game plan is going to be to spread it out and throw the ball against Tampa Bay because you can't run the ball against this team. They have arguably the best run defense over the second half of the year. They're playing really well on that defensive front. So give me Bryce Young. I can't do Anthony Richardson anymore.
Yeah. I mean, those are the two that I have highlighted in my sheet too, Bryce Young and basically Colts quarterback. There really is, it's tough to go anywhere other direction this week, especially in cash. But running backs, maybe Devin, maybe you're avoiding the Colts running back or quarterback because you want to play Jonathan Taylor. Is that what your thoughts are on the cash slate for the running backs here, or are you going a different direction there?
I'd like to play him at 7,900. The question I then have is like, can I just pay up $700 more for Saquon Barkley, and do I feel better about that? Against Dallas, it's hard because if Pickett plays, and it looks like he's going to, Is it wrong to say I like Saquon a little bit more?
No.
Than with Jalen Hurts? Maybe it
He's not
is
going to
because
get sniped
Saquon.
on the goal line.
Yeah, but he didn't catch a pass last week, and that's concerning. He only had one target. It's 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, but that was against Washington. Dallas's defense isn't that great. But Jonathan Taylor doesn't catch passes either. Give me Barkley. I think the player is just better. Taylor is too inconsistent. It feels like you're point chasing a little bit. If Joe Flacco does start, which all signs are pointing to it looking that way, I don't really like Taylor because I think they'll spread the ball out quite a bit and throw it more than they otherwise would. But the number one guy I have this week is Bucky Irving, 6,700. It's a plug and play in cash, I think, and it really has been since like week 2 or 3 that like you should just play whoever is facing the Arizona or the Carolina Panthers. There's not really much more to say there. They're on pace to be one of the worst run defenses that we've seen in several years. They've allowed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of their last 7 running backs they've faced have topped 100 yards. So I mean, it's kind of just smoke them if you got them.
Phil, what are you looking for your running backs?
Yeah, so I like Devon Achane at 7,700 better than Barkley at 8,600. Miami doesn't have those quarterback concerns that the Eagles do this week, and I feel like Achane's stat lines are a little bit easier to predict, and they still have similar ceilings, Barkley and Achane. But I love it in the passing game. He's got at least 7 targets in each of his last 4, so you could bank on the receiving work. We saw him get back to busting big plays with a 50-yard run last week, and I don't see why he can't keep it going. I mean, the Cleveland defense is bad. Miami,
Disagree with that. The
I
one
don't
area that's
know.
strong for that team is their run defense.
I just see this game as a potential blowout. I think they're going to be set up with short fields. I think
They've
Achane
only
can
allowed
capitalize on that.
one running back all season to top 20 DraftKings points.
The good news is the Dolphins can't run the ball anyways, so Devin
That's
Achane can still score points.
fair. That's
what I'm
fair. I
saying.
mean,
They use that short receiving game as an extension of the run game. I just think it's going to be completely one-sided. I mean, Miami needs that one to keep whatever narrow playoff scenario they have going. I think they're going to be going all out against a team that has effectively quit.
as a cash game play, I'm okay with it. We're going to talk about GPPs in a little bit, and that's where I'll push back if you have him on your GPP list because he's trending to be about 35% rostered, as well as Chuba Hubbard is trending to be about 30% rostered. And I think it's just point chasing. You're taking whoever had one of the best weeks last week and playing them in really bad matchups.
Yeah, for that reason, I think we'll get to it, but I like the Dolphins passing game in tournaments, HN notwithstanding. And then the other guy, yeah, I want to play Bucky Irving if I can. That matchup against Carolina is unassailable. They allow 38% more fantasy points than league average to running backs. And it was just a couple of weeks ago that Irving himself put up like 185 scrimmage yards and a touchdown in the matchup. I will say if you can't fit him, and that's where the $1,000 going from um, Flacco to Anthony Richardson might end up mattering. I think at 6,200, Aaron Jones is probably viable. Um, Revenge spot against Green Bay, but more importantly, I think he's finally past the nagging injuries that have bothered him in the second half. We saw him reclaim his workhorse role that he had earlier this year in the Vikings last game. Snap percentage back over 75%, 18 carries to just 1 for Cam Akers, and had 5 targets in the passing game. And like I said, that offensive environment might be the one to hit, regardless of format. So I think Aaron Jones is also acceptable. Um, And then just the one injury really to monitor is Tyrone Tracy. I mean, I don't know how crazy I'd be to play Devin Singletary, but the Giants are playing the Colts, which is a decent enough matchup. Singletary is only 4,200, and it's looking like Malik Neighbors could even miss that one. So that opens up even more short area targets for the Giants. So at 4,200, I think you'd have to consider Singletary if that opens up too.
I would
That is
play if Tyrone Tracy is active, I like Tyrone Tracy.
at the
Going
same
up
price
against.
point. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, man.
Go ahead.
No. Finish your
You
Tyrone
go.
Tracy point. You have
Nope.
something important to say about Tyrone Tracy, Devin.
No, you're going to be the one that's disappointed about Josh Allen, so I'm going to let you have the floor and speak your piece.
I was simply going to mention at the same price point, you can if Devin A. Chan and Chuba Hubbard are carrying high ownership going into these tournaments, Jonathan Taylor and Bucky Irving are the same price point. That's a potential pivot there. But I know that we're popular on them for cash. But what's the very important about the Purdue wide receiver playing running back, Devin?
No, I just think he's underpriced. 56 or 5,800. He has 14 or more DraftKings points in 3 of his last 5 games. People don't want to play him because he had a 4.5 DraftKings points against Baltimore, but in the other game that he failed the top 14 was Tampa Bay, 2 of the 3 best run defenses in the NFL. So I think he's a guy who, I mean, you look at his stat line and really dating back to October, it's 23 against Cincinnati, 6 against Philly. Philly has a very good run defense. 26 against Pittsburgh, 7.9 against Washington. That is the outlier game that I don't really like. But 20 against Carolina, 10 against Tampa Bay. Again, good defense. 14.5 against Dallas, which is acceptable. And then he torched New Orleans and then struggled against Baltimore. So, like, he's been good against average or worse defenses, and he's played some really good run defenses. So that's it. I'm sure people
Wide
love me
receivers.
rattling off stats, which lost us half our audience, but that's all right.
Well, what are your wide receivers for your cash games there, Devin? If you want to talk about some more numbers right away.
Yeah. I think it depends because if Joe Flacco starts, I believe I'm going to want to go. I always get this wrong, and that's the problem. I'm going to go Josh Downs. 4,800 over Michael Pittman, who's 4,700. The last time we saw Joe Flacco, Josh Downs had 7 for 72 on 10 targets. Pittman didn't play, so that obviously inflates the numbers there. But I believe in Josh Downs, even though he was early on in the season the top guy, kind of fell off, and then but in most of Flacco's performances, he has been the top guy, and I think that certainly adds some upside to the passing game if Flacco starts. Brian Thomas Jr. I don't know how you don't play him at this point. I know the price is high at 6,800, but he's just dominating with Mac Jones. 16 or more DraftKings points in three straight games, 35 last week. It's kind of just a plug and play type game. And then if Devontae Adams is active at 71, I think that's really difficult. I don't know that he's going to play. He missed practice, I believe, today. So if he doesn't play, Garrett Wilson is certainly intriguing because Aaron Rodgers is just in. I don't know what he's in, but he's ready for his ayahuasca retreat, and he doesn't care if he's throwing interceptions or who he's throwing the ball, but he's going to throw it. Next, Cleveland Browns quarterback Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers has 499 career touchdowns, and I don't know if he cares about numbers, but I would have to believe that Devontae Adams, if he's active, is going to get a very early red zone target, if not multiple very early red zone targets, because you would have to think that that 500th touchdown pass going to Devontae Adams, certainly for terms of narrative, but also for their relationship, probably feels like a pretty strong chance of happening. But
He's the
Phil,
only receiver. He's the only receiver in that room that Rodgers trusts is not going to throw the ball in the crowd.
Well, maybe Lazard, but yeah.
Yeah,
That's
Lazard's
probably where it
character,
would be.
Lazard's
That's where it would
character
be,
is like
actually.
Garrett Wilson
Lazard
is
would
so
catch the touchdown.
frustrated. Garrett Wilson is so frustrated. He throws it into the
Aaron,
crowd. For
he's putting that to the second bag. Phil, what do you got for your cash game wide receivers?
Similar to Devin, except if I'm spending into that 7,000 plus range, I like Mike Evans. He's got 2 weeks left to accumulate 182 receiving yards if he wants to extend that streak of 1,000-yard seasons to 11 straight. And I think that the Bucks are very aware of that milestone, and Baker Mayfield will force that issue whenever possible, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of winning the game. But it kind of helps that Carolina has no one that could guard Evans. He went 8 for 118 and 1 on 12 targets a couple weeks ago against Carolina. And he's one of the few receivers with a baseline projection at or above 20 DraftKings points. So I like him. Brian Thomas, like Devin mentioned, the price is inching up, but like he said, at sub 7K, we're still getting a very rare convergence of talent and opportunity. He's got catches of 40 plus in 3 of the last 4 games. So he's kind of unfadable until further notice. Josh Downs, if Flacco plays, for sure. And if Flacco plays and I'm playing Downs, then I'm probably going to flex a wide receiver. And it's probably going to be Calvin Ridley at 5,500. And I don't feel as strongly about this one as those first 3, but only because the target volume hasn't always been there. Like he's having these 5 target games, but at least Will Levis is out of the picture. And with Mason Rudolph out there, we saw a big play touchdown to Calvin Ridley last week. He's another one in a revenge game if that's your thing. And the Jaguars in the second half are allowing some nuclear wide receiver 1 games. That was Devontae Adams, 9-198-2 a couple weeks ago. There was an 8 for 119 to Nico Collins, week 13, 11, 161 and 2 to Amon-Ra St. Brown back in week 11. So even if he only does the 5 target, 9 DraftKings points thing, Ridley won't kill you. And there isn't a whole lot that I like in that price range outside of maybe Adam Thielen, who is boring, but he's lower variance than Ridley. So if you're just looking to put double-digit DraftKings points in there at 5,700, I think Thielen, as Bryce Young's go-to guy against that suspect Tampa secondary, is probably a good play.
Yeah, I think a couple other names. Jalen McMillan at 4,600. We've seen touchdowns in 3 straight. The snaps have been there for a little while in terms of him being the wide receiver 2. Now the volume is starting to get there in terms of targets. And obviously with Brandon Cooks, with CeeDee Lamb being out, Brandon Cooks at 4,600, I think is the direction I would go for a potential outside of Jake Ferguson, maybe as a potential pass catcher if you wanted to go there. I know Philly's defense has been lights out against wide receivers. Those corners have been excellent. And so that might be a stay away, especially in a cash lineup. But, maybe that's where you go tight ends, and that opens it up. Tight ends here. And Phil, what are you looking at for your tight ends of your cash lineup?
Yeah, Jake Ferguson is a good call, and that's something that I didn't really consider with Lamb going out, but certainly the targets are going to consolidate, so that will affect his projection for me. I had T.J. Hawkinson at 4,500. Just in the passing game, tight ends are easier to attack the Green Bay secondary with, and the Packers are bottom 12 in fantasy points allowed to tight ends, both over the last 5 weeks and throughout the season. It's a pretty weak tight end slate. Brock Bowers is 6,700, so you can't fit him in. And at least we know for a relatively cheap price, 4,500, that Hawkinson is good enough. That 20 plus DraftKings points are within the range of outcomes. The game environment is right. The matchup helps. So I think either him or Ferguson.
Devin, what do you see?
Yeah, I think for me it's gonna be Ferguson unless Payne Durham is a guy who sees some work there. And Durham, if K. Dotton is out, had 7 targets last week, caught 5 of them for 40 yards. I'm looking for a way to spend down. 5th round pick out of Purdue. So he does have some athletic ability. At least he was drafted. But, 7 targets from this Baker Mayfield offense. You could do worse, but it's probably Jake Ferguson.
Last week on the show, I called him out, and I know some popular people have had having some fun on social media. Chico Conquo, 3,600. He had 8 catches for 59 yards, career highs 2 weeks ago. Last week he beat those numbers, 9 catches for 81 yards. He's had 21 targets over the last 2 weeks. They've really focused on involving him ever since that big 70-yard touchdown against the Texans. At 3,600, I know we talked about Calvin Ridley as a potential play in cash games. I much rather would go with Chigakonkwo at 3,600 right now, and the way that he's moving in that Tennessee offense.
He was on my list as also viable. I think that the only concern there, 21 targets in the last 2 games, you love to see it, but Tennessee was forced to play catch up in those games. So that while he might maintain a target share that's high because they are involving him, I just don't know if like the raw targets are going to be there if, now they're playing the Jaguars. So it might be tough to go in expecting like double-digit target volume. So
yeah,
for me, for cash, I think that there's a little bit more variance there with Chiga Conquo than I would like. And it does look, I was looking, it looks like Kate Otten missed practice today. So Devin might be onto something there at 2,900 with, what was his name? Payne Durham.
Yeah.
Devin going with Tyrone Tracy and Peyton Durham playing the all Purdue lineup here in this short slate. So I like that.
Boiler up.
Boiler up. That's right. Before we open it up, and no Rondale Moore. Before we open up, make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans. Become a Hall of Fame subscriber. Check out the options there. The GOAT tier, whatever it might be. I know Christmas is now over, but maybe a New Year's resolution is you want to keep winning and you want to be a Football Guys subscriber to do that. But let's open it up in GPP plays. Devin, quarterbacks off the board. What are you going with in your GPP lineups?
Aiden O'Connell, 5,100. Really good stacking pairing. Where is this New Orleans head? Where's their team at? I don't know, because they just got absolutely embarrassed 34-0. If you're a defender and you saw Spencer Rattler play last week, what's the point, right? You give up 3 points, you're probably going to lose. So I think O'Connell still has some things to prove. Certainly, he's not going to be the starter next year, but he's going to be playing for roster spots between him and Gardner Minshew and Desmond Ridder. So this team should still be motivated offensively, continue to pair him with Brock Bowers or Jacoby Myers. So I think it's a really good stacking pairing. But I think it's a really good price. Tua Tagovailoa is the next guy. Again, I'm trying to target these teams that have certain groups that have quit. And Cleveland is certainly in that group. So if I look at the Browns, the Browns at the end of the game allowed a touchdown to Jamar Chase, and the cornerback ran about 5 yards and then just stopped running. And there wasn't a guy within 15 yards of Jamar Chase. So they're down their top 2 corners who are out for the year. Recently, Denzel Ward is still there, but what's the point of even playing him at this point? Because he has 5 or 6 concussions in the last 4 years. So if he gets another one, he's probably toast. Again, I think that the run defense is playing strong, and I think that Devin Achane, I don't know that he has the upside that you would want from that, but I think Tagovailoa certainly does. And that's, it's kind of it, because unless you're going up, there's only one guy you would really want to go up to, and that's Josh Allen. But 8,500, I don't know that the Jets can do enough to force him to have one of his mega games. But I mean, Bryce Young, again, I would probably play, even though he's going to be about 12% rostered. I don't take roster percentage too seriously at the quarterback position because we're primarily doing that at all of the other positions that with guys that are 2 to 3x um, their roster percentage. So if like a quarterback is 11% versus 6%, who really cares? It doesn't really make that big of a difference compared to like a running back who's 35 versus a running back who's 18. Like that makes a lot more difference than a quarterback. So Bryce Young is completely fine in GPPs.
Phil, are you similar plays? Anything else?
Yeah, I think I do want to spend up at quarterback because I'm just looking at this list of players and like who are who are the guys that are going to get you 30? Josh Allen in a bad game against the Jets could get you 30, and then at that point, if you're playing an Aiden O'Connell who gets his 17 points, and I'm just throwing that out there because it was someone Devin named, so it's fresh on my mind. I'm not saying that O'Connell's a bad play, but let's say he gets let's say he gets 17 to 20 points. You're still buried by an Allen game at quarterback if he puts up that kind of game. I think he's capable. Tua is capable. Baker Mayfield is capable. He is the second highest projected quarterback scorer on this slate. I don't love it, but we know that the offense is in a good spot. His wide receiver one and running back one are both guys that we mentioned in cash games. The team is at home, favored by more than the touchdown. They need a win, implied to score over 28. Objectively, he's one of the best plays on the slate.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
then with
I think
that,
what you have to ask yourself is whether or not Josh Allen is going to do that. And you need to that needs to be your principle as you're building lineups for this week. Because if you say, hey, he's only going to get 23 or 24 or 25 even, then your 17 versus 25 for $3,100 doesn't look like that great of value. So I think
right,
yes, he could get there. He could get to 30. But the question is what side of that coin are you willing to fall on?
right.
And for me,
It,
I don't know.
it has to be a multi-entry thing. I guess I should say when I'm talking like that, it means that you're going to be building some lineups that are working under that assumption, right? That Josh Allen is going to put up the 40-point game. And I think you have to do it in your portfolio this week just because it's an obvious way to gain a lot of leverage on the field. Because if he puts up one of those scores that only he could put up, nobody at the position on this slate, I don't think is catching you. Like I said, maybe Tua, maybe Mayfield. I guess Darnold might have it in him, but probably not against Green Bay.
But the way you
That's
need to look at it is if Darnold gets there, or if Josh Allen gets there, but if Saquon Barkley gets to his ceiling game, then if you have a Josh Allen lineup, you're not going to have a Saquon Barkley lineup. So
right, but there's running backs in Barkley's price range that could approximate Barkley's ceiling game, whereas at quarterback, I don't see it.
yeah, fair.
We've talked about at the beginning of the show really kind of two games to target. One of them was Packers Vikings, and outside of Aaron Jones, we haven't mentioned Packers Vikings at all through kind of a lot of this. Sam Darnold and Jordan Love going in here. The Packers could know, and the Vikings could know too, but the Packers could know, depending on the Washington Atlanta game, if this game means anything at all for them. Because if
Washington Atlanta is after Green Bay Minnesota.
Oh, I thought that was the Saturday night game. Never mind.
Sunday night game.
Okay.
Saturday night game is the Cardinals Rams.
I had this whole thing worked up, and then we're gonna go but okay. Anyways, they could score a lot of points in that game, and you could play Sam Darnold probably. They have not shown the willingness to get the training wheels off Jordan Love. Maybe they do approach it as a get right on the passing offense game against the Vikings, but I do think that the Vikings go out there and potentially hang a number. But the Packers do want to run the ball and have shortened games. There's risk involved there, and I think that you're talking about top end quarterbacks there. We talked about Mike Evans. We talked about Bucky Irving. We talked about Jalen McMillan. I mean, maybe at some point, just Baker Mayfield with all those things in play there is just kind of the direction to go. But running backs, Devin, or let's do Phil. GPP plays on running backs.
Yeah, so we mentioned Jonathan Taylor a little bit earlier when we were talking about cash. I'm glad that I believe all three of us recommended him last week in what will probably go down as his best game of the season. But I think you go back to him, especially if Flacco gets the nod, because then that pairing, Flacco and Josh Downs in the passing game, probably becomes the most popular in tournaments, and Taylor is direct leverage on that. And, maybe he'll be a little bit overowned because everybody remembers him breaking off like those Forrest Gump runs last week where like he's still running. But, I don't know if people are crazy to go back to him. The other one that I like is a little bit ugly, Alexander Madison at 5,600. There's a rotation there now, a pretty clear rotation with Matt.
Yeah, we're not doing Alexander Madison.
You just muted him. Good. I'm glad you muted him and not me because I was also thinking about Alexander Madison. But
I'll unmute you, but my God.
Had the lead on
doesn't even know.
downs.
Doesn't even know. He's just going on.
Doesn't even know. He doesn't even know that he's been muted for the last 90 seconds.
All right. Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Look, Alexander Madison, he still had the lead on early down carries, on short yardage, and at the goal line. It's strange to say it, but the Raiders are short road favorites this week because they're playing the Saints, who looked like a bad college team last week against the Packers. And if we believe what our eyes told us about the Saints, Madison ought to get 20 touches on the cheap here at 5,600 against a bad defense. 4 or 5 of them are going to be receptions because Aiden O'Connell is going to check it down regardless of the game script. I think that this is going to be one of those things where I haven't run the Sims just yet, but the Sims are going to love him. And, who am I to argue with the supercomputers?
Yeah, because everyone's making
one man
extreme money.
Computers.
Everyone's making extreme money with playing Sims.
By starting Alexander Madison.
Yeah, 3.2 yards per carry. If you're gonna play a running back in the Raiders, why don't you just play Amir Abdullah? Like, he's gonna catch more passes. He's gonna, at least has some life in that running back room. But I'm not playing either of them. I guess. I think it's funny because the guy that preached to us about Josh Allen and the upside and blah 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 gives
How
us
are you
a running
fitting Josh Allen? Josh Allen's 8,500. You gotta make some sacrifices.
That's my point. Is that I told you about Saquon Barkley and you're like, well, I could spend at 7,500 and everything's going to be fine with Devin Achane. Yeah, Devin Achane and Saquon Barkley have probably a similar ceiling, but you know who doesn't? Alexander Madison.
He's going to score 3 touchdowns now just because of this.
I mean, if he does, I'll do some sort
catch
of
7 balls, score 3 touchdowns.
I'll give people a signed Alexander Madison jersey. How much is that going to cost me? Like $9.99?
Pretty cheap in case you're just looking for ideas for the Football Guys gift exchange. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so that was the first mute of the season, I think, but that was fun. I mean, at running back, I don't see. I mean, similar to what Phil said at quarterback, I look at the first 6, maybe 7 guys that are going to be highly rostered, and I don't really look beyond that. So I already said I'm fading the top 2 guys, which are Devin Achane and Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard, I don't see any path. I mean, there's always a path. You could break a tackle and be gone, but the likelihood at $7,000 that he has a big game against Tampa Bay seems low to me. This is a team that's allowed 47 rushing yards per game since week 10. Carolina's offensive line has been a bright spot, but they don't have anybody who can guard Vita Vea, and I think it's just going to be a nightmare of a situation. Bucky Irving, certainly the top guy that I have on my board. Jonathan Taylor, I think, is fine. Breece Hall is interesting. I don't love it. But if I look at Breece Hall, it's a guy who's sort of like a Devin Achan light, because he's been catching. He's had these games. He had five receptions against the Rams last week, and 7 against the Colts a couple weeks ago. That, if he can catch 5 to 6 passes, get 14 to 15 carries, okay, at 6,300. The way to beat Buffalo has been on the ground this season, although people really haven't beaten them. They've just kept games closer than they otherwise should be. So Breece Hall is fine. I'm not playing Josh Jacobs because Minnesota's run defense is really good, and he's 8,100. I guess the name that I would look at. Do we dare look at Kendry Miller at 5,500? It's bad. I mean, but they're facing a Raiders defense that isn't anywhere close to the defense that we saw with Green Bay, and that game script just really got out of hand. So, sort of like the unknown door is better than the pit of death with Alexander Madison. Like, if you're opening that door, you're just gonna fall like 1,000 feet. This one, like, you're probably still gonna fall 1,000 feet, but maybe it has like a gold coin at the bottom of that pit. I don't know. It's week 17.
If you're in that range, you could look at Tajay Spears too. Tony Pollard keeps somehow like gluing himself together and getting out there on Sundays, and he probably will again. But at this stage of the game, it's pretty evident that Spears is the one that's got fresh legs, and he's doing stuff. I mean, he's not going to score 2 touchdowns every week, but I don't know. It is Jacksonville. Maybe Pollard goes down early in the game or is limited, and you can actually use him to stack the offense if you're playing a Tennessee stack.
Pollard did go over 1,000 yards on the season last week. Not necessarily that these guys are going for numbers or anything like that, but he did hit a milestone. So if he was kind of pulling himself together to get out there to hit that milestone, he did get there. I like that Tajay Spears call out. I was going to go there if you didn't. It certainly does have an element of point chasing, but at the same time, it's been a whole lot of points the last couple of weeks. He's been running back 4 in fantasy for the fantasy playoffs so far. So that, I think that one's in play. Rachaad White at 5,700 as a pivot off Bucky Irving, a popular Bucky Irving play. I mean, he's getting it more out of the passing game. Last week, at least he did, but you're still hitting up against that Carolina defense. We've seen Bucky Irving go out from injuries, have these back injuries that he's been working with, a hamstring injury, I think it was too, that he's been working through. So you've got those types of things for a potential big day against Carolina for Rachaad White at 5,700. James Cook, I think, is in play at 7,200. Talk about the way that they've run. He did 2 touchdowns last week. They've been willing to. He's leading the league in touchdowns, and that kind of says something that James Cook is leading the league in touchdowns. So that's also in play. Wide receivers, Devin. What are you looking at? Wide receivers.
Yeah, this is another one where like the top. I mean, the question that we have is Brian Thomas because he's going to be 30 to 35% rostered. It seems too high at $6,800. Like, I don't know. I like his floor, but if I look at the guys in that price range who are going to be lower rostered, you can get a Tyreek Hill at 6,900. Who I don't know who's going to cover Tyreek Hill. They're going to try with Denzel Ward, but like he hasn't really shadowed receivers this season. Mike Evans is in that range. Garrett Wilson, if Devontae Adams doesn't play, is significantly cheaper. So I'm probably fading Brian Thomas just because I don't know. There's a rookie wall that's going to be hit at some point, and he's been good, but I think it's a little bit of point chasing. And Tennessee's pass defense has been a strength of that defense, despite that team really struggling. Is there anything to like in this Eagles offense? I mean, the matchup for Pickett should be significantly better than Washington this week. And
So Yeah, the bright spot there is they, with Pickett in, they exclusively threw it to AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. They didn't even mess around with anybody else. So you had
Right.
AJ
So,
Smith getting hyper targeted, one of his career highest target numbers.
but like Devontae Smith is 5,800. That just seems low against a Dallas defense that, like, Deron Bland is probably going to be on AJ Brown. Devonta Smith, I mean, nobody's going to want to play him because they're going to see Kenny Pickett as the starting quarterback there, and I don't know that it hurts those guys nearly as much as, like, Jalen Hurts isn't throwing for 300 yards. So if you like them with Hurts, yeah, the offense suffers, and maybe their touchdown equity goes down a little bit, but the targets I think should be there. 5,800 I think is a fine price there. I'm avoiding Green Bay. I've avoided them all year. I'm not starting in week 17. One of these receivers probably will have a good game because Minnesota has one of the worst pass defenses against wide receivers this season. I'm just not in the business of trying to pick out which one. So the other name, I mean, Calvin Ridley, I think is fine. He's going to go overlooked somewhat. I mean, he's right now trending about 15%, which seems a little low. If I'm not going to lie, I think that it's been lower than what we've seen in the past several weeks. So for me, I mean, looking through the list, it's going to be fading Thomas, playing Ridley, playing Tyreek Hill, playing Josh Downs if Flacco plays, playing Devontae Adams, playing Garrett Wilson, or Devontae Adams depending on if Adams is active. So there's some guys there. I'll let Phil kind of wrap it up, but
Yeah, I think we're pretty much aligned on the main plays. Garrett Wilson was the first guy on my list, and it was actually before I realized that Adams still hadn't practiced this week. So at 6,100, he becomes totally cash viable and probably a lock cash game play if Adams is out. But if he's not, this guy's really mad about playing second fiddle to Devontae Adams, and he let the world know it this week. So he's the hyper squeaky wheel. Um, Aaron Rodgers even had to acknowledge it. Like it's just a thing. They're going to throw to Garrett Wilson one way or another. So for
are they?
tournaments, they are.
Aaron Rodgers isn't making up with his family, so is he going to make up with the wide receiver he's never going to talk to again in 2 weeks?
I think he is. I think he is.
All right, that's improvement.
Yeah, yeah. People grow up, Devin. They change. But no, I think that for tournaments, we just have to hope that Adams plays and keeps Wilson's ownership suppressed. On the Colts end, if Flacco plays and Downs ends up very highly owned, I think Michael Pittman is an easy way to cut that chalk. He had some monster games with Flacco at the end of last season, and even this season, in what's been kind of a lost season for him. He's caught 2 touchdowns from Flacco, and he has another game with 113 yards. So we know that that's still in there. And 4,700, I mean, that's a real dented can price for Michael Pittman. That's low. So I like that. I like the Tyreek Hill call as HN leverage. I like it even better if Jalen Waddle doesn't make it back for this one. Looks like he's been back to a limited practice, so we'll have to see how that works out tomorrow. But Hill's another one that was in the media this week. He had to answer some questions about his lack of production this season. He said he had no excuses, and then he used his torn wrist ligaments as an excuse. But I think that he would like to go out there and have a big game. And I think that the Cleveland pass defense is certainly beatable for big plays. And then if I do like the idea of Josh Allen, then I have to like the idea of some Buffalo wide receivers against the Jets. It's really confusing picking out which ones to play now that everyone's healthy. But I guess I would rank them Shakir, Keon Coleman, Mac Hollins, and then Amari Cooper. I don't know how that happened, but they all seem viable in Allen stacks to me. And
Worst trade in sports.
yeah, worst trade in sports. But then that's another thing to consider too with Josh Allen is that these stacking pieces are cheap enough that you can gain back some of that salary that you're losing by paying up to him. Um, and still have a lineup that projects for enough points. So I think that's about it.
Justin Jefferson. I'm sporting my Randy Moss. We're fighting for Randy Moss here with the cancer announcement, and I know that Monday night Justin Jefferson scored a touchdown for Randy Moss. Randy Moss had a big. He did a lot of things to the Packers in during his career, and Randy Moss, Justin Jefferson. Let's go get it. 2 touchdowns. Justin Jefferson is riding a heater right now. He had a quiet about 7-week stretch. Now he's got 5 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. So I think he's going to come in here. Big game this week. Justin Jefferson at the top of the board. Adam Thielen at 5,700. He's still getting the targets. Last time he played the Buccaneers, he should have had 2 touchdowns the last time they played the Buccaneers. He still got the numbers last week, despite Jalen Coker 2 weeks ago having a bigger day. Jalen Coker was quiet last week. Thielen at 5,700. That's what I got. I mean, Jalen Tolbert, if you really wanted to go down at 4,100 with CeeDee Lamb out of the lineup and you really just needed a dart throw, something to throw in there, Tolbert down there at 4,100. I mean, if Garrett Wilson is out, Alan Lazard at 4,000, another potential dart throw. Like we said, if that 500 touchdown isn't going to Devontae Adams, then it go to Alan Lazard. So there you go. But yeah, I mean, that's about what you have there. But tight ends, anything else on the tight end board?
Oh, yeah. David Njoku. Talked about it last week. About 40% of all passing yards from Dorian Thompson-Robinson go to tight ends. What happened last week? 42% of passing yards went to David Njoku. Cedric Tillman's limited. Jerry Jeudy's limited. The guy just looks at tight ends, and nobody's going to want to play him because it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He's the only guy that they look to. So David Njoku, 4,700, I think is the only Cleveland Brown that I will recommend anytime Dorian Thompson-Robinson starts.
And we think he's playing through this knee thing.
He didn't practice, so if he doesn't, I think Jordan Akins is fine. I mean, Thompson-Robinson is not changing his style. It's been every game, almost 40% consistently clockwork. It's not like he had 80% one game and a couple 10% in there. It's almost every single game is 40%. So it could even be hey, Jordan Akins, you're at 2,900 or whatever your price is. Let's go. 2,700. I would play him over Payne Durham this week. The other thing, I mean, we're talking about these low end guys. Brock Bowers, if you can afford him, I mean, and you can build a lineup around him. Talk about an advantage like we talked about and debated about at the quarterback position, but there's nobody that can come close this season. I know Hawkinson has had some big games in the past, and Jonnu Smith has had some big games, but 6,700 isn't that prohibitive. It seems that way, but it really isn't. And you can certainly flex him. You could play 2 tight ends. You could do a couple different things that are pretty creative, but 6,700 Bowers versus 6,800 Brian Thomas, I don't know that there's that much of a difference between upside there.
I got some numbers. David Njoku, over his last 3 games, has 24 receptions. He only has 160 yards. The only players that have 24 plus receptions in a 3-game span for only 160 or less yards are all running backs in the NFL history, except for David Njoku. So I think that's an interesting number.
I look at it and say 8 receptions a game.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
that's a good nugget. I'll throw Jonnu Smith back out there. 6 for 62 last week was his worst game since week 10. And with Waddle either out or banged up, I think you got to like his chances. Goes back to that Miami passing game in tournaments that we talked about. So you could stack Tua with Tyreek and Jonnu. And then the other one that I like is probably going to be off the board because it's a New Orleans Saint, but Juwan Johnson at 3,500. I mean, yes, the Saints are bad, but they were drawing completely dead against the Packers. I don't know that that's the case against the Raiders. And Johnson, it's a tight end friendly matchup, the Raiders, and like his competition for targets is literally Dante Pettis, like who I absolutely thought was washed out of the league, but turns out I saw him on my TV the other night. So I think at 3,500, if you want to punt tight end, Jawan Johnson is an interesting one who's going to come in low on.
Jatavian Sanders at 2,800. Tommy Tremble missed his limited participant on Thursday's practice, and Tremble and Sanders have kind of been going back and forth at that tight end position. If Tremble's out at 2,800, Sanders is a player that could step in there, get some volume, and go against this Buccaneers pass defense that we've liked other options against so far. That's all we've got for the GPP portion, which means it's time for our favorite stacks of the week. And Phil, what is your favorite stack of the week?
Yeah, it's a Baker Mayfield stack. I would say there's plenty of ways that you could do it. One of my favorite ways is to put the running back in there. That would be Rashad White. So you could do Mayfield, White, Evans. You could do Mayfield, Evans, McMillan, and gain leverage on Bucky Irving. And then the run back, I think, would be Adam Thielen.
Devin, what do you have?
Aiden O'Connell, Brock Bowers. I've already talked about both players, so I'm not going to do that again.
Mine, like we're out here for Randy Moss. We're gonna go with Sam Darnold, Justin Jefferson. Just go with it. So go with that.
What if he came out in an 84 jersey?
I'm telling you, wouldn't count it out. Phil,
he moved the goalpost.
Yes, that would be beautiful. Phil, what do you have for your bargain play of the week?
All right. What if I told you that there was a wide receiver with 32 combined targets over his last 3 games, and the fewest targets in that stretch was a 9-target game in week 15, under 4,500?
I would say it's Wan'Dale Robinson, and he's not going to get any yards, but yes.
All right, it's totally Wan'Dale Robinson. Can't get anything past Jeff Bell, man. But I will say that, Wan'Dale, and you might end up with a little bit of upside if Neighbors is out. Then he might catch like 12 to 15 passes for 55 yards.
What do you have, Devin?
All 5'6" of Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm gonna go Jordan Akins. Assuming Njoku's out, I just think at 2,700 he's gonna have at least 50 yards receiving this week.
Back to the well, Chikakonkwo for our freedom for 3,600. I think it's legitimate, the targets that he's been getting the last couple of weeks, but we'll see what happens there. But that's all we've got for this holiday edition, week 17 of the Fantasy Football DFS Show. And Devin, what do you have to send the people home with?
Yeah, last official week of the year. Jeff and I are going to be in the same room for 3 days divisional round, so we might do a live Q&A or something like that for 20-30 minutes, but it's all we got. So we hope to see you back next year. I don't know what next year brings, but there's certainly never a guarantee, but certainly hope that we'll be back next year. And certainly give this a like, give us a comment, tell us if you want us to go away, if you want us to be back next year. We'll take any feedback you got. So hopefully everyone had a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. And we'll see you guys next year.